why did God disappear, die, let's say, and the psychoanalysts believed that God sunk into the unconscious. That was Jung's proposition, that if God dies formally, all that happens is that the prime factor becomes unconscious. So imagine this. This is how you could think of that technically. So imagine now you have your cloud of concepts. So with the central factor of the good itself and maybe the essence of being itself, being by definition, this is by definition, by the way, that's what God is. And when there's a concordance between the explicit religious belief and that implicit network of meaning, you have a conscious God at the center, like you're conscious of that God. But then if you dispense with that central uniting proposition, you don't eradicate the commonalities between what is good. You just let them sink back into implicitness. And that seems to me to be equivalent to the descent of God into the unconscious. That's the same thing as Geppetto, for example, going down into the belly of the whale, is that now God becomes implicit, right? But that doesn't mean that he's not there. He's still coded in the relationship between those things that are meaningful. Okay, so that's pretty wild. And then with regards to... Go ahead.
If I can just jump in. What happened to God, the disappearance of God, is a function of this misinterpretation of God as a being. And we can see when that happened. It happened by the late Middle Ages, when Aquinas' more analogical metaphysic gave way to a univocal conception of being. That's in people like William of Ockham. And when that happens, see, God is still there, but God is now one being among many. God's the supreme instance of the category being. Well, all right, in the late Middle Ages, God's still there. We take him seriously. But now move forward. As God is seen as a being among many, he becomes more and more distantiated, more and more irrelevant to the world. And then in early modernity, he becomes a rival to the world. And it has to be that way. If you and I were sort of plotted on the same mathematical grid, we're going to be to some degree over and against each other. We'll be battling for the same space. So God and humanity are on the same grid, both beings, one's smaller, one's bigger, but they're of course going to come into conflict. Now look, read a lot of the early moderns that way. Then keep going, and you come right up to the atheists who finally say, look, I've had it with this being. I don't want this big being interfering with my freedom and my self-definition. Now you've got Jean-Paul Sartre, right? If God exists, I can't be free. But I am free, therefore God doesn't exist. That, I would argue, is in the mind of almost every teenager in the West today, that idea. God is a rival to my freedom. But you know this, how repugnant all of that is to the Bible, right? In fact, this morning in my office, so as a priest, I pray the Liturgy of the Hours every day, and we had the passage from Isaiah, and it says this, Lord, you have accomplished all we have done. It's a little line, but it'll take your breath away if you get it. Lord, you have accomplished all we have done. We've done it, but you accomplished it. The implication there is God is not a rival to our thought or to our action or our achievement. In fact, the glory of God is a human being fully alive, as St. Irenaeus said. See, that's what modernity begins to have a problem with. And when you follow that trajectory, you get all the way right to the atheists who say, well, I don't want this big being interfering with my life and my accomplishment. And then we'll go back to something we've both talked about a lot, the burning bush, right? Which is on fire, but not consumed. And that's a biblical imagination. When God comes close to the world is luminous and beautiful, compelling, and it's not consumed. It's not destroyed by the divine proximity. So that's the biblical idea that was compromised by the late Middle Ages, became exaggerated in the modern period, and then comes to full fruition with the atheists. So whether it's Feuerbach or Sam Harris, it's a very similar problem. And they're not getting, seems to me, the biblical understanding of the non-competitiveness of God with the world. But that comes from this idea of God as to be itself, not a being.
Right, right.
I think of that's the deep metaphysical background for what we're dealing with today.
Yep.
Why has God disappeared? Bishop Barron gave his answer. Jordan Peterson gave his. Now it is your and my turn to answer this question. Why has God disappeared? I challenge you to sit in silence with this question and to try to be courageous and vulnerable in answering for yourself, why has God disappeared? My answer to this will be on the blog post in the link below, and I encourage you to engage in this conversation and share your own thoughts about why has God disappeared in your life. God bless.